Sviatoslav I. Sviatoslav I Igorevich Old East Slavic, Stoslav/Svetoslav Igorevich, Svętoslavŭ Igorevičī Russian, Sviatoslav Igorovich, Ukrainian Sviatoslav Igorovich, romanized Sviatoslav Ihorovych, 943–26 March 972, also spelled Sviatoslav. He also conquered numerous East Slavic tribes, defeated the Alans and attacked the Volga Bulgars, and at times was allied with the Pechenegs and Magyars. His decade-long reign over the Kievan Rus was marked by rapid expansion into the Volga River valley, the Pontic steppe, and the Balkans. By the end of his short life, Sviatoslav carved out for himself the largest state in Europe, eventually moving his capital in 969 from Kiev, modern-day Ukraine, to Pereyaslavets, identified as the modern village of Nufăru, Romania on the Danube. In contrast with his mother's conversion to Christianity, Sviatoslav remained a staunch pagan all of his life. Due to his abrupt death in ambush, his conquests, for the most part, were not consolidated into a functioning empire, while his failure to establish a stable succession led to a fratricidal feud among his three sons, resulting in two of them being killed. Name. The primary chronicle records Sviatoslav as the first ruler of the Kievan Rus with a name of Slavic origin, as opposed to his predecessors, whose names had Old Norse forms. Some scholars see the name of Sviatoslav, composed of the Slavic roots for holy and glory, as an artificial derivation combining the names of his predecessors Oleg and Rurik, whose respective names mean holy and glorious in Old Norse. Svenold or Sveneld is identical to Sviatoslav as the Norse rendition of the Slavic name. Early life and personality. Virtually nothing is known about Sviatoslav's childhood and youth, which he spent reigning in Novgorod. Sviatoslav's father Igor was killed by the Drevlians around 945. Sviatoslav was tutored by a Varangian named Asmud. The tradition of employing Varangian tutors for the sons of ruling princes survived well into the 11th century. Sviatoslav appears to have had little patience for administration. His life was spent with his Druzhna roughly company in permanent warfare against neighboring states. According to the primary chronicle, he carried neither wagons nor kettles on his expeditions, and he boiled no meat, rather cutting off small strips of horseflesh, game, or beef to eat after roasting it on the coals. Nor did he have a tent, rather spreading out a horse blanket under him and setting his saddle under his head, and all his retinue did likewise. Sviatoslav's appearance has been described very clearly by Leo the Deacon, who himself attended the meeting of Sviatoslav with John I Tzimisk. Following Deacon's memories, Sviatoslav was a bright-eyed man of average height but of stalwart build, much more sturdy than Tzimisk. He had a bald head and a wispy beard, and wore a bushy mustache and a sidelock as a sign of his nobility. He preferred to dress in white, and it was noted that his garments were much cleaner than those of his men, although he had a lot in common with his warriors. He wore a single large gold earring bearing a carbuncle and two pearls. Religious beliefs. Sviatoslav's mother, Olga, converted to Orthodox Christianity at the court of Byzantine Emperor Constantine Porphyrogenitus in 957, at the approximate age of 67. However, Sviatoslav remained a pagan all of his life. In the Treaty of 971, between Sviatoslav and the Byzantine Emperor John I Tzimisk, according to the primary chronicle, he believed that his warriors Druzhna would lose respect for him and mock him if he became a Christian. The allegiance of his warriors was of paramount importance in his conquest of an empire that stretched from the Volga to the Danube. Family. Very little is known of Sviatoslav's family life. It is possible that he was not the only or the eldest son of his parents. The Russo-Byzantine Treaty of 945 mentions a certain Prislava, Volodislav's wife, as the noblest of the Rus women after Olga. The fact that Prislava was Oleg's mother is presented by Vasily Tatashev. He also speculated that Prydslava came from the Hungarian nobility. George Vernetsky was among many historians to speculate that Volodislav was Igor's eldest son and heir who died at some point during Olga's regency. Another chronicle told that Oleg, 977, was the eldest son of Igor. At the time of Igor's death, Sviatoslav was still a child, and he was raised by his mother or under her instructions. Her influence, however, did not extend to his religious observance. Sviatoslav had several children, but the origin of his wives is not specified in the chronicle. By his wives he had Yaropolk and Oleg. By Malasha, a woman of indeterminate origins, Sviatoslav had Vladimir, who would ultimately break with his father's paganism and convert Rus to Christianity. John Skylitzes reported that Vladimir had a brother named Esfengus. Whether this Esfengus was a son of Sviatoslav, a son of Malasha by a prior or subsequent husband, or an unrelated Rus nobleman is unclear. Children: Prydslava, Oleg of Drelenia died 977. Yaropolk I of Kiev 952–978 Malasha. Vladimir the Great c. 958–1015. Esfengus. Eastern campaigns. Shortly after his accession to the throne, Sviatoslav began campaigning to expand Rus' control over the Volga Valley and the Pontic steppe region. His greatest success was the conquest of Khazaria, which for centuries had been one of the strongest states of Eastern Europe. The sources are not clear about the roots of the conflict between Khazaria and Rus, so several possibilities have been suggested. The Rus had an interest in removing the Khazar hold on the Volga trade route because the Khazars collected duties from the goods transported by the Volga. Historians have suggested that the Byzantine Empire may have incited the Rus against the Khazars, who fell out with the Byzantines after the persecutions of the Jews in the reign of romanized. Sviatoslav began by rallying the East Slavic vassal tribes of the Khazars to his cause. Those who would not join him, such as the Vyatichs, were attacked and forced to pay tribute to the Kievan Rus rather than to the Khazars. According to a legend recorded in the primary chronicle, Sviatoslav sent a message to the Vyatich rulers, consisting of a single phrase, "I want to come at you," Old East Slavic "Kachu navai iti." This phrase is used in modern Russian and Ukrainian, usually misquoted as "I do navai." Proceeding by the Oka and Volga rivers, he attacked Volga Bulgaria. He employed Aghaz and Pecheneg mercenaries in this campaign, perhaps to counter the superior cavalry of the Khazars and Bulgars. Sviatoslav destroyed the Khazar city of Sarkal around 965, possibly sacking but not occupying the Khazar city of Kerch on the Crimea as well. At Sarkal he established a Rus settlement called Belayavaya, the White Tower or the White Fortress, the East Slavic translation for Sarkal. He subsequently destroyed the Khazar capital of Atal. A visitor to Atal wrote soon after Sviatoslav's campaign, "The Rus attacked, and no grape or raisin remained, not a leaf on a branch." The exact chronology of his Khazar campaign is uncertain and disputed. For example, Mikhail Artamanov and David Christian proposed that the sack of Sarkal came after the destruction of Atal. Although Ivan Hockel reports the sack of Samandar by Sviatoslav, the Rus leader did not bother to occupy the Khazar heartlands north of the Caucasus Mountains permanently. On his way back to Kiev, Sviatoslav chose to strike against the Ossetians and force them into subservience. Therefore, Khazar successor statelets continued their precarious existence in the region. The destruction of Khazar imperial power paved the way for Kievan Rus to dominate north-south trade routes through the steppe and across the Black Sea, routes that formerly had been a major source of revenue for the Khazars. Moreover, Sviatoslav's campaigns led to increased Slavic settlement in the region of the Saltovo-Mayaki culture, greatly changing the demographics and culture of the transitional area between the forest and the steppe. Campaigns in the Balkans. The annihilation of Khazaria was undertaken against the background of the Rus-Byzantine alliance, concluded in the wake of Igor's Byzantine campaign in 944. Close military ties between the Rus and Byzantium are illustrated by the fact, reported by John Skylitzes, that a Rus detachment accompanied Byzantine Emperor Nufăru's focus in his victorious naval expedition to Crete. In 967 or 968, Nufăru sent his agent Kallikiros to persuade Sviatoslav to assist the Byzantines in a war against Bulgaria. Sviatoslav was paid £15,000 of gold and set sail with an army of 60,000 men, including thousands of Pecheneg mercenaries. Sviatoslav defeated the Bulgarian ruler Boris Roman II and proceeded to occupy the whole of northern Bulgaria. Meanwhile, the Byzantines bribed the Pechenegs to attack and besiege Kiev, where Olga stayed with Sviatoslav's son Vladimir. The siege was relieved by the Druzhina of Pritić, and immediately following the Pecheneg retreat, Olga sent a reproachful letter to Sviatoslav. He promptly returned and defeated the Pechenegs, who continued to threaten Kiev. Sviatoslav refused to turn his Balkan conquests over to the Byzantines, and the parties fell out as a result. To the chagrin of his boyars and his mother, who died within 3 days after learning about his decision, Sviatoslav decided to move his capital to Pereyaslavets in the mouth of the Danube due to the great potential of that location as a commercial hub. In the primary chronicle record for 969, Sviatoslav explains that it is to Pereyaslavets, the center of his lands, all the riches flow, gold. In summer 969, Sviatoslav left Rus again, dividing his dominion into 3 parts, each under a nominal rule of one of his sons. At the head of an army that included Pecheneg and Magyar auxiliary troops, he invaded Bulgaria again, devastating Thrace, capturing the city of Philippopolis, and massacring its inhabitants. Nufăru responded by repairing the defences of Constantinople and raising new squadrons of armoured cavalry. In the midst of his preparations, Nufăru was overthrown and killed by John Tzimiskes, who thus became the new Byzantine emperor. John Tzimiskes first attempted to persuade Sviatoslav to leave Bulgaria, but he was unsuccessful. Challenging Byzantine authority, Sviatoslav crossed the Danube and laid siege to Adrianople, causing panic in the streets of Constantinople in summer 970. Later that year, the Byzantines launched a counteroffensive. Being occupied with suppressing a revolt brought by Bardas Phocas in Asia Minor, John Tzimiskes sent his commander-in-chief. Meanwhile, John, having quelled the revolt of Bardas Phocas, came to the Balkans with a large army and, promoting himself as the liberator of Bulgaria from Sviatoslav, penetrated the impracticable mountain passes, and shortly thereafter captured Marcianopolis, where the Rus were holding a number of Bulgar princes hostage. Sviatoslav retreated to Dorostalin, which the Byzantine armies besieged for 65 days. Cut off and surrounded, Sviatoslav came to terms with John and agreed to abandon the Balkans, renounce his claims to the southern Crimea, and return west of the Dnieper River. In return, the Byzantine emperor supplied the Rus with food and safe passage home. Sviatoslav and his men set sail and landed on Berezin Island at the mouth of the Dnieper, where they made camp for the winter. Several months later, according to the primary chronicle, their camp was devastated by famine, so that even a horse's head could not be bought for less than a half grivna. While Sviatoslav's campaign brought no tangible results for the Rus, it weakened the Bulgarian state and left it vulnerable to the attacks of Basil, the Bulgar slayer 4 decades later. Death and aftermath. Fearing that the peace with Sviatoslav would not endure, the Byzantine emperor induced the Pecheneg Khan Khazaria to kill Sviatoslav before he reached Kiev. This was in line with the policy outlined by Constantine Roman VII Porphyrogenitus in De Administrando Imperio of fomenting strife between the Rus and the Pechenegs. According to the Slavic chronicle, Sveneld attempted to warn Sviatoslav to avoid the Dnieper rapids, but the prince slighted his wise advice and was ambushed and slain by the Pechenegs when he tried to cross the cataracts near Khortytsia early in 972. The primary chronicle reports that his skull was made into a chalice by the Pecheneg Khan. Following Sviatoslav's death, tensions among his sons grew. A war broke out between his legitimate sons, Oleg and Yaropolk, in 976, at the conclusion of which Oleg was killed. In 977 Vladimir fled Novgorod to escape Oleg's fate and went to Scandinavia, where he raised an army of Varangians and returned in 980. Yaropolk was killed, and Vladimir became the sole ruler of Kievan Rus. Art and literature. Sviatoslav has long been a hero of Belarusian, Russian, and Ukrainian patriots due to his great military successes. His figure first attracted attention of Russian artists and poets during the Russo-Turkish War 1768–1774, which provided obvious parallels with Sviatoslav's push towards Constantinople. Russia's southward expansion and the imperialistic ventures of Catherine Roman II in the Balkans seemed to have been legitimized by Sviatoslav's campaigns 8 centuries earlier. Among the works created during the war was Yakov Nyazhnin's tragedy Olga 1772. The Russian playwright chose to introduce Sviatoslav as his protagonist, although his active participation in the events following Igor's death is out of sync with the traditional chronology. Nyazhnin's rival Nikolai Nikolov 1758–1815 also wrote a play on the subject of Sviatoslav's life. Ivan Akimov's painting Sviatoslav's return from the Danube to Kiev 1773 explores the conflict between military honor and family attachment. It is a vivid example of Poussin's rendering of early medieval subject matter. Interest in Sviatoslav's career increased in the 19th century. Klavdy Lebedev depicted an episode of Sviatoslav's meeting with Emperor John in his well-known painting, while Eugene Lanceray sculpted an equestrian statue of Sviatoslav in the early 20th century. Sviatoslav appears in the 1913 poem of Velimir K.H. Lebnikov written before the war #70. Napisano du Vojny as an epitome of militant Slavdom. Sviatoslav is the villain of the novel The Lost Kingdom, or The Passing of the Khazars, by Samuel Gordon, a fictionalized account of the destruction of Khazaria by the Rus. The Slavic warrior figures in a more positive context in the story Chernai Strely Vyaticho by Vadim Viktorovich Kargulov. The story is included in his book Historicheski Posti. In 2005, reports circulated that a village in the Belgorod region had erected a monument to Sviatoslav's victory over the Khazars by the Russian sculptor Vyacheslav Klykov. The reports described the 13-meter-tall statue as depicting a Rus cavalryman trampling a supine Khazar bearing a Star of David and Kalavrat. This created an outcry within the Jewish community of Russia. The controversy was further exacerbated by Klykov's connections with Pamiet and other anti-Semitic organizations, as well as by his involvement in the Letter of 500, a controversial appeal to the Prosecutor General to review all Jewish organizations in Russia for extremism. The press center of the Belgorod Regional Administration responded by stating that a planned monument to Sviatoslav had not yet been constructed, but would show respect towards representatives of all nationalities. When the statue was unveiled, the shield bore a 12-pointed star. Sviatoslav is the main character of the books Nyas Nyas and the Hero Geroi, written by Russian writer Alexander Mazin. Sviatoslav plays a major role in the Soviet historical anthology film The Legend of Princess Olga, which tells the story of his mother, Olga. Sviatoslav appears in various segments, both as a child as an adult. The adult Princess Sviatoslav is played by Les Serdia. On 7 November 2011, a Ukrainian fisherman found a 1-meter-long sword in the waters of the Dnieper on Khortytsia near where Sviatoslav is believed to have been killed in 972. The handle is made out of 4 different metals including gold and silver, and could possibly have belonged to Sviatoslav himself, but this is speculation. The sword could have belonged to any nobleman from that period.